Yeah. So once again, I welcome all of you to this masterclass brought to you by the community of practice of team and group coaching, members of ICF Mumbai Charter Chapter. Yeah. So today's topic is Team Coaching Masterclass, a reflective case study. Team coaching is the fastest growing area of coaching, with corporate buyers increasingly expecting coaches to have both individual and team coaching expertise. And our learning goals for today are how team coaching differs from one-to-one coaching, how we can gain an understanding of how to navigate a team coaching engagement using a practical framework, exploring a case study of this framework in action with insights and learning from the practitioner's lens, how to approach each stage of a team coaching assignment with confidence, and finally understand why employers are investing in team coaching. And for today, our speaker is Geraldine Gallacher. She is the CEO of the Executive Coaching Consultancy, which she started in 1994 as one of the first executive coaching providers, and now has over 90 coaches internationally serving a wide range of industries, and an accredited master coach with the Association of Coaching. She is also co-chair of Inclusion and Belonging to the City Women's Network and author of Coaching Women, Changing the System, Not the Person, published by Open University Press. Geraldine will share her insights into team coaching by walking all of us through a recent case study. She will share her personal approach to team coaching alongside practical tips for application at each stage, gained from reflections on her practice in this area. An interesting fact about her is she's also a tap dancer, and she will keep us tapping through the session today with her insights. With no further ado, I'm going to present the stage to you, Geraldine. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Kavita, for that kind introduction. And welcome to this masterclass on team coaching. I'm Scottish, you might hear from my accent, but I'm sitting here in London where I actually live. So it's lunchtime on Saturday in London, and believe it or not, it's actually sunny. So most unusual. So today, to give you a little bit of context, I'm going to share my screen because I have 34 slides, just to give you a sense of the context and how many slides I've got to go through. And as Kavita said, what we've decided when planning this session is it might be easier if I walk through all the slides and you gather your thoughts as you go through with your questions and in the chat function. And Sagarika is going to manage that very kindly for me as we go through. And it's just because I feel I've constructed the session, and some of the questions you might ask early on might come up later. So without further ado, I will in fact share my screen, and here we are. And just check, can you all see that?
Yes, we can, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so good evening and welcome to this masterclass on team coaching. As Kavita has introduced me, I am indeed an executive coach and have been since 1994. And over those years, I have mainly done one-to-one coaching, and latterly since 2005 we have become well known for trying to improve the number of women leaders in organizations. So that's very much my focus has been has been very much about group coaching of senior women, and also one-to-one coaching. And it was about 18 months ago, I too felt, as Kavita mentioned, I felt that there was a rising interest in team coaching. And so I decided that I would, it's never too late to continue to train. And so I decided that I would join the Global Team Coaching Institute and do their qualification. And I'm now an accredited team coach with the GTCI. So I think it's important that I make the point that the model that I'm going to walk you through is very much from the GTCI, and very much a lot of what I'm talking through comes from the Peter Hawkins book around team leadership coaching. Yeah, and I think we're going to put the link up for you for later. So what we're going to talk about is team coaching. I want to make it clear that in the past, over obviously the last 30 years, I've done loads of one-to-one coaching and I've done quite a bit of group coaching. And I thought I had done team coaching, but I'd done really, it was more like team facilitation when I think about it. I'd done quite a lot of away days with teams. I worked on how they work together. But really, my main focus has been one-to-one coaching with leaders. And I recently have begun thinking, because teams form and reform and change so quickly nowadays, I'd felt the need to work more quickly with the leader by working with them and their team. And so therefore I thought, actually, I need some training in this. I felt I needed an actual model to be able to make sure that what I was doing was as effective as it could be. So already, Kavita has already talked you through what I'm hoping to cover today, the learning objectives. So I'm not going to repeat those. I'm just going to get my boxes of my little screen out of the way. Yeah, fine. And the question, I guess, you might all be asking is, why are employers investing in team coaching? I'm sure if I asked you, I could get a number, many, many reasons why. My own feeling is that now that we're working in a more agile way, team and team effectiveness is becoming increasingly more important. And the speed with which you can get up to performance is ever shortening. One has to be effective so quickly that I think that's why there's an increased interest in team coaching. I also think it's something to do with our move away from hero leadership, where it's the leader that runs everything, to a recognition that leadership is more distributed. And so actually what makes companies effective are really effective teams. So I think that we will continue to see an increase in interest from clients in this area of team coaching. So team coaching isn't what I thought it was, which was having 7 members of the team come to me and I would work with them individually, find out what they'd like to talk about in a group session, get them together in a group, and then individually work with them afterwards. It's not about team facilitation. I mean, some of these things are involved, can be involved in team coaching, but the team coaching that the assignment that I've taken on and the reflective case study that I'm going to talk about is actually not along these lines, but rather it is, next slide. Yeah, sorry. But rather, this is what we're talking about with team coaching. This is about when you coach the whole team in workshops, it's actually more dynamic in the sense that the team determines what the sessions are going to be. And you're helping to clarify the team's purpose, help them work through what they're trying to do, as well as how they do that. And if you like, you're coaching an entity in its own right, and you're coaching the team, not the individuals within the team. Yeah, which is quite different than how I had previously conceived it. I'd like now to give you a little bit of context in terms of the team that I chose to practice this new way of working on. And I think this is really important for you because it talks to the contracting part of team coaching. Because I was about to try something completely different, and I was going to be working with a team coaching associate, so there were going to be 2 of us, I decided that it was only fair that I work with the client that knew me very well, I had worked with. And so the property company that I approached about doing team coaching, I have worked with on and off and coached a number of individuals, done some Myers-Briggs team facilitation sessions over the last 15 years. So there was a really strong level of psychological safety, both for me and for them, in terms of having me try something out, which was entirely new. I also decided to work with one of my own team coaches, who is the newest, youngest team, not team coach, is not a qualified team coach, youngest coach that we have. So I was experimenting on 2 fronts. One was by using this process, and secondly, working where I was coaching someone else, who's a newly qualified coach, but not necessarily team coach. And so I felt it was only fair to be absolutely transparent with my client. And so I approached the team, I approached the HR director. I told her about this. I had a coffee with her. I know her well enough, and said, look, I'm really curious about this. I actually think I could work with, and the leader that I worked with is a female called Vasiliki. And so we'll call her Vaz. And so I said, I really think I've worked with Vaz in the past on a one-to-one basis. And I actually think her and her team would be a good place for, they could really improve with some team coaching. And also, I think she trusts me well enough to be able to, to go along with this. I think she's experimental enough. What do you think? And the HR director thought it was a great idea, but what she wanted myself and Baz, the leader, to do was to pitch to her and to the executive director on the board that managed Vaz. So what we did was we jointly put together a proposal. I decided that I knew this was going to take a lot of time, so I decided I wasn't going to be doing it free of charge. And so, but what I didn't know was how much time it was going to take. And this is a really important dimension of team coaching that it's worth bearing in mind. And so I just guesstimated that I was going to charge them, that I was going to charge £10,000 for the assignment, and it was over 5 months. And it was an open-ended risk from my point of view, because I didn't know actually how many hours I was going to use. In the eventuality, in the commercial ones amongst you will be interested in this, in the eventuality, it actually was more, it should have been charged at £30,000. So, and £30,000 is what I would charge now going out to a new client in terms of the time that it took. £10,000 for this particular client, given what they were getting and given how much they trusted me, was enough to make it not difficult to get sign off. So I think that's quite an important part of the contracting. So the contracting wasn't like going out and selling it to a new client and contracting with them, which I think would require quite a different process, actually. So let's talk through now what actually happened. This is the model that Peter Hawkins and the GTCI use, and it's called the 5 disciplines model. And as you can see, I'll let you read it. The 5 C's model. So I just want to draw your attention to the structure of this. The commissioning and the clarifying is more about the task element, and the co-creating and the connecting is more about the people dimension. The commissioning, which is about the purpose, and the connecting is more about the stakeholders, is more about what happens outside the team, and the clarifying, which is more about, the actual objectives themselves, what they're working on, what's the what, and the co-creating is about how they work together, is more about what's going on inside the team. So one of the things that I've discovered, we introduced this model early on to the team, and we actually felt it was possibly a little bit too theoretical, and on reflection, we would prefer, and we've now simplified it to this, which is, and I'd like you to just try and bear in mind this, the why, the what, the how, the who, and then the bit in the middle is what is the learning process itself, yeah? And I've color-coded the presentation so you can see what we did and when we did it in accordance to this model, yeah? Now, the very important thing to point out here is, and a big learning for me was, it doesn't follow a structure that follows from, why, what, how, and who. It jumps around. And the idea of the team coaching is the team determines where to go. And that is very, very different from my own experience, where I was more in control of the structure and I was more in control of what we were actually going to be talking about. And this was a big difference. And one of the things that we did early on is we wanted to match the pace of meetings that normally occur with the team. So we established that a long meeting for them would be 90 minutes, and a lot of meetings they tried to do in an hour. And so we matched the pace of the organization with that, in that respect. We also made sure that we were, it wasn't spread out over too long a period. And because these sessions were short and it was over quite an intense period of time, I'm pleased to be able to say we had 100% attendance on all of the sessions, which, as you all know, one of the big problems about running team facilitation days or any kind of teamwork is the chances of getting everybody present on the day is quite small. Well, it is in the UK. I'm making big assumptions there. Maybe it isn't. And so that was a big observation. And one of the reasons why we were able to do that was we made the decision at the beginning that it would be okay to be hybrid. Now, the thing is, this is a property company and they were convinced everything would be in person. And this is what I'm finding with a lot of organizations. They say, no, Geraldine, it's going to be in person. We want it to be in person. However, I no longer believe that, because now that we have the hybrid facility, things do go awry and people do sometimes need to come in online. And we did actually have a few people who had COVID. And interestingly, I don't know about the ethics of this, but interestingly, they made sure they came to the meetings, even so, because they wanted to. So even though they weren't 100% well, they did come to the meetings. So that's the module. If you can get that, if you can plant that, I'll come back to it a few times. And now I want to talk to you about the process and how we went through the model, the order, the sequence of events. So I've matched the colors. And what you can see is we started actually with the what. We then moved to the who, which is about stakeholders. We then went to the how. We then went to the why. And then the one at the end is actually a mixture of both the what and the who. No, it's not. It's a mixture of the what's team coaching and giving and receiving feedback, which is the how. Should I just take you back to remind you of the model, just to give you the colors again? Why, what, how, and who. And almost intellectually, I thought it would make a lot of sense to start with, why are you a team? What is it you do? How do you work together? And who do you need to connect with? But that isn't how the team wanted to work at all. In fact, they wanted to dive straight in with what, okay? So our very opening session with them involved us introducing ourselves, and let me take you to it. It involved us introducing ourselves, and sure enough, 2 of the team weren't in the room, 2 of them were online. And it involved us simply introducing ourselves, talking about the what, the why, the how, and the who, explaining it's their process, and asking this one question: what do you think would be most helpful for the team to get out of this process? And these are what came through. And I had my fellow coach, Michelle, who's 30 years younger than me, and brilliant on tech. And so she was able to, in the room, move the, as you use Zoom, you can use the whiteboard. She was able to move it around and collate, as we worked, collate online this set of objectives, if you like. I'll let you read them. Okay, I know there's a lot there. One of the things I just want to draw your attention to is how many of these were actually about the how they work, and how few were about why they were a team. Some of them are about what they do, and some of them were about stakeholders, which is the who. So this is what was really apparent to both myself and to Michelle was they really wanted to work on how they work together. So what that led us to do, and this is where you have to dance in the moment, is we had to, with the help of them, say to them, okay, so this is what you feel would be most helpful. Then let us make a couple of suggestions about how we might go about that. So we didn't go in knowing what was going to come out of this meeting, but at the end of it, what we offered was 2 different ways of collating feedback. One was a team survey, and the other was a stakeholder survey, yeah? Because we felt they want to work on how they are together as a team. So we need to help them figure out how are they working together as a team. And the other thing is they wanted to know, they wanted to link in with their stakeholders. So we provided both a team survey and a stakeholder survey. And I thought you might, and that was essentially what our next session was going to be about. So between the first session and the second session, they did the stakeholder survey interviews, and we provided a team survey and we collated that survey. So let me just take you through a little bit. When we started that second session, we thought, well, before we get into the analysis of the information that's come back to us, let's use, and this is just a tool that we use as an icebreaker, and it's the emotional barometer. We knew they wanted to work on how they operate well as a team. And so what we wanted to do was give them a really quick tool that you put up on the board at the beginning of a team meeting, and you just get people to say, where are you now today on the emotional barometer? And what that does, as I'm sure you realize, is it allows people to, it normalizes that you might be coming in stressed because, you know, maybe you were up all night with a baby. You might be irritable because you've just had a really bad conversation with someone. Equally, you might be in a great positive mood. You might actually just be in a more observant, calm, but you don't feel very high energy. And what we wanted to make the point is that mood regulation is a really important part of team dynamics, and not to imagine or expect everyone to be in the top right-hand corner all the time. So that was partially about creating some psychological safety as well, and the psychological safety to be not in a good place, which is, I think, really helped them just as a tool, and they continue to use the tool this day. So what we did was, I mentioned to you that we'd surveyed the team on their thoughts on the team, and we got them to actually do the stakeholder interviews. They did them in pairs and trios. So everybody in the team, of which there are 10, everybody spoke to a stakeholder, either in a pair or in a trio, rather than they decided that everyone wanted to have those conversations rather than just one person go off and do it. And the activity for this session was going to be analysing the data and determining the actions that are going to come out of it. So let me just give you a very quick look at what the data looked a bit like. This is the high value creating team questionnaire, which is 18 questions. And the 18 questions all correspond to the model, the 5C model. So they all are questions around those 5 Cs, you know, the why, the what, the how, and the who. In terms of what that kind of looks like, I don't, there's too much detail to go into all of it, but I just thought you might like to have a look at how that actually looks if you're a participant filling it in. That's just a little snapshot. So stuff that you would expect in something like this. The results, first of all, just a very small tip here. We didn't use the company that provide this. It's called Renewal Associates. They can do all the analysis for you. You just pay for that to be done. We decided to do it ourselves. Michelle and I, it was a nightmare. I would definitely recommend that you pay to have it done, or even think about a simpler questionnaire. I felt it was over-engineered, and we ended up with the breakdown of results, you know, a hell of a lot of information. And I think what you'll probably see is we had massive range in most of the dimensions, which is confusing. And what was really, and then we had all the verbatim comments as well. So it was almost an excess of information, obviously. And what was a learning point for all of us in the room was how they decided to use the analysis of this. Now, in the past, I would have analysed it, picked out the key points and just summarised it for them. But because we were getting them to own the process, and that's the beauty of this version of team coaching, is we asked them, how would you like to analyse the results? And someone volunteered to, if you like, to just start going through it. And it was so inefficient. I mean, it was quite frustrating for both Michelle and I to watch how she was going through one line at a time and just ask, and there was no process. So what we decided was, this was clearly, we knew that we had 90 minutes. This was clearly not going to work. So we thought we're going to have to do an intervention here. So we did a timeout. I said, how do you think this is working? And someone made the point it's quite a slow process. And we gave them the suggestion, you might want to break the task down. They rejected the request. So what we did offer is, you might want to think about the meeting in meetings in terms of always appointing a chair, a scribe, and a timekeeper. And they did take that up, and indeed to this day they still now do that, and that's helped make the meetings more effective. So it was a very uncomfortable meeting, because we could see it was kind of taking a hell of a long time, and it was a bit unproductive. But what was really interesting was that the woman that offered to volunteered, nobody was prepared to challenge, even when I challenged, she wasn't prepared to change the process. And so that was quite an interesting piece of information for us to watch 10 people in a room. It wasn't just us thinking this is not an effective way of doing this, but no one was prepared to challenge it, including the team leader. So that was interesting. We did eventually get on to, and I thought you might find it interesting just to see what the stakeholder interview questions were. And these are nice and simple. The very interesting thing that we learned from this process, which is worth bearing in mind, is that firstly, you keep the team survey simple. That was just way too complicated. It really didn't need the level of detail that we had. And let them do the analysis and make them plan in advance how they're going to run the session. Yeah. Okay. And so, for example, the real way to do it is really just to have gone in on the range, the ones that had a high range. That would have been a way to look at it. But in the moment, choosing the wrong analysis method when you've got 10 people in a room proved really unproductive, and actually was quite an eye-opener for how they operate as a team generally. The second thing that we noticed, which we were quite surprised by, is when we asked them to do a stakeholder, we hadn't clarified what we meant by stakeholders, and they didn't survey anyone except the board, which was a real indicator for us of how hierarchical the organization was. And that played out, that particular piece of information played out throughout and was very interesting information about the team. And I mean, we obviously highlighted to them that we'd noticed that they only spoke to the board, and we had a discussion about it. And then we observed how they operated the process, and we introduced the timeouts, and we introduced the roles of chair, scribe, and timekeeper, which they continue to use. And the big thing that was a challenge, that proved a challenge for us and for the team, was that the stakeholders didn't agree on the purpose of this team. So this team isn't the board, and you need to think about that as well. This team, when it comes to the why of the team, this team was a level below. And as a result, we found the purpose session and working out what the purpose of the team was quite hard to get to, for reasons that I'll come on to later. But anyway, that was the learnings. This is where we were in the process. By this time, we'd begun to recognize, and so just to see where we are now. So we've talked about the what, we've talked about some of the stakeholder feedback, which is the who do you have to interact with? And they were really keen, the next session, they were very, very keen that they do a session on how they're working together. They were dying to get to be more, which was clearly very needed, to be more clear about how to give feedback and how to sort of interrupt when a meeting wasn't going well. So that was their choice to do the next session. And what we did at this point, which I would strongly recommend, is we realized that it was a good idea to work with a couple of the members of the team to put together what each of these sessions were in advance. And so what we did was we asked for 2 volunteers who then worked with us to design. Now, Michelle and I designed the session. However, we 24 hours before the meeting, so you have to be very fast on your feet, because what you need is 24 hours before the meeting is you need the context that they're operating in to see what's appropriate and if it's still appropriate to do it like that. And we found we were changing things up 24 hours. So in terms of from a commercial leader of a team that runs this kind of stuff and having to make money and having to be profitable, you need to build in the fact that the design process is actually often more time consuming than the actual sessions themselves, because you have to consult. And also the time between the sessions is quite small, so you have to be available. And also the other part is, because Michelle works for me and she works in my organization, we could time getting together very easily. But if you're working with another co-coach that doesn't work in the same time zone, that doesn't work in the same company, has got other clients, that can be quite complicated. So you just need to bear that in mind, that, you know, there's a lot of getting your diaries together, and you have to be pretty flexible to be available to do this kind of work. So you have to make sure you charge enough to build in that sort of flexibility. Anyway, the actual session itself, they really wanted it. These were the objectives of the session. Had a little bit of input from ours, obviously, because we had to talk about feedback, and we had to give the difference between feedback in the moment and feedback, you know, from a performance perspective. And we did Myers-Briggs with them all, and so we had to feedback the team Myers-Briggs and the individual feedbacks. We just did them as a team. They're quite familiar with Myers-Briggs, a lot of them, so that was quite quick. But this one was a 2.5-hour session, so it was a bit longer. So what they ended up with is, what did they want to do next? And largely they wanted to know, they loved the set, they enjoyed the session, they got a lot out of it. What I noticed was that when we built them up to give, and we talked a bit about radical candor, about the importance of feedback and constructive feedback, but what we noticed is when we got them into, we did that session, that, you know, that exercise where you get around, you ring a bell, and people go and spend 5 minutes with one, and then you ring a bell again, and then they have to spend something, you know, with someone else and give them some constructive feedback. Nobody gave anything but positive feedback. So that was a learning, that they were really still not feeling psychologically safe enough to give any real tough feedback. I mean, it was, you could say that maybe the environment, you know, it was too quick, etc. But I had actually run that with boards, and they've been very tough. But I don't think there was enough psychological safety in the room yet for them to do that. And it was a big, big team, 10 people, it's quite a lot. So that was interesting observation. So where are we now? What we got them to do, obviously, is to, how can we use what we've learned today in our meetings and interactions? And, you know, they had a lot of takeouts from that. But the thing that they decided they wanted to do is and whether they decided or whether we decided for them, I would have to own up here, is I think I was feeling a bit uncomfortable that we hadn't really reconciled the fact that the stakeholders all had different expectations of them as a team. And I don't think we really had worked out what was the why of this team. So I think I persuaded them really that what we wanted to do was next, we needed to focus on the purpose. And I think part of that was, if I'm really honest, is I thought, I'm not going around my model if I don't do it. Anyway, the biggest learning of all was in the purpose session. So for the purpose session, we decided that we needed to introduce a bit of input on stakeholders, yeah, because to be able to do the purpose session, we needed to talk to them about the fact that they'd only gone to, when you talk about the why of the team, you need to go beyond just what your board thinks. You need to think much, much broader. And this was a real sticking point because of the level of the team. I really don't think we got this. I don't think we landed this with them, because, you know, they're thinking, oh, we don't deal with investors, Geraldine, or we don't deal with the community. You know, there was lots of reasons why we don't deal with these stakeholders. And that was interesting. And I'm still quite not sure why we failed to convey some of this. By the way, for those of you wondering what the 13th fairy in the 7th generation is, the 13th fairy is that Grimm's fairy tale where the princess invites 12 fairies along to her coronation, to Queen, I think it is. And anyway, she overlooks one of the fairies and doesn't invite this fairy. And so the fairy turns up and is very annoyed and places a curse on the princess. So the idea is that when you're in any room with any team, You need to think about who's the person we're accidentally forgetting to think about, because they're the person that are going to come and scupper our best made plans. And so you should always have someone take the seat of the 13th fairy. So it's just and it's good for your teams as well. Who is the 13th fairy? We're all aligned. We all think this is going to work. Who might not? And someone take that role. And the 7th generation is not just your kids, but to what extent is what we are doing now in service of future generations? And so this is obviously getting at the ESG, the environmental, social and governance agenda. And even though they were a property company, and even though they talk quite a bit about green, etc., I think it was a signal that they were so hierarchical as an organization, they didn't own the 7th generation. They felt that was for the board, which is interesting in its own right. And again, another observation about the hierarchical nature of this team. We also did Simon Sinek. Very quickly, we just went through the starting with the why. And I think what happened here, now I need to explain the dynamics. We were in a room, it was a long table. Michelle and I were at this end of the table, and they had a huge screen at the other end of the table. And the two people that couldn't come in person to the meeting that day were Vaz, the leader, and her sort of unelected number 2. The two biggest voices in the room were offline. That actually created a really interesting dynamic. Because this is quite a hierarchical team, it was actually very hard to get them stop looking to me and Mo, because we were working on them taking ownership of the session. And in the absence of having Vasiliki and Kelly, who's the other big voice in the room, a lot of them were deferring and looking to us. Now, whether there was an element of that, which is about, I'm older than them, a lot of these are young men in their 20s and 30s, and the women, actually, funnily enough, the leaders were older women. And so who knows, there's all those kind of dynamics going on, which you've got to acknowledge and accept. So we tried an exercise, and this is the exercise, which was a creative build, which I'm sure you're all aware of, where you say, okay, we're going to ask you a question. The team's collective endeavour is to, and then everybody, to avoid just having the loudest voices in the room all the time, what we did was we asked everybody to write down on their own post-it notes, their own post-it note, write down what they thought. And we actually started with the creative build by asking, who is the person in the room that usually speaks less in meetings? And by this time, they were definitely warming up and trusting us, and there was a lot more psychological safety in the room. And so, in fact, the junior person, and we insisted on having this 2 secretaries, by the way, in the team meeting and the team meetings. And one of the secretaries, a young Black girl, who said the least, volunteered to start. And then I asked them to all go in order of share of voice in reverse. And that's a really interesting thing to do, actually, as an exercise, because what you found was you found out who the biggest voices were, and you found out that people realized who the biggest voices were as well. And it made the biggest voices in the room acknowledge that sometimes it's better to start in reverse and have those kind of ways of debriefing things. So that was a good thing that we did. However, what we found very quickly was there was such confusion between a why, a how, and a what that it went all over the place. Vasiliki and Kelly not being in the room because, and this is an issue with hybrid working, there wasn't enough protocol around how do you make sure that you bring people in the room. And because by this time we were trying not to take control, they need to take control of how are you doing it. So our observations were things, how we would stop every now and again, say, Vasiliki and Kelly are here. How are you going to involve them? But it was really difficult to get them to not ignore the people that were not in the room. And Vasiliki had a very strong view of how this meeting should go and what the team's collective endeavour is, and she couldn't get heard. I panicked a bit, and I found myself wanting to take control. and trying to, because it was going so badly awry, I thought, oh, crikey, I'm going to have to put some order in here. So I started to try and re-explain the why, the how, and the how and the what to give them. But it became a semantic discussion, and it was a complete waste of time. Except what I did do eventually is I said, do you know what? I'm standing up here. I've got the pen. I've got the flip chart. This is precisely the opposite of what I actually want to happen, which is I'm taking over here, and I shouldn't be taking over. So I want you to decide what's going wrong and what to do next, which was quite a good intervention. And what was brilliant was one of the young men in the room said, well, I think, you know, we shouldn't be doing this because, and he gave a really good reason why it's not going to work like that. And I said, so what would you like to do? And he made a suggestion, and then others joined in, etc. And almost, you know, the young up and coming guy in the room came up with a brilliant way of running it. And then when I said at the end of it, what did we learn from this meeting? Because it was a whole 90 minutes. They all said what they learned was, why did they not interrupt what was not going well earlier? And that brought them on to thinking about, because we don't, because we only interviewed the board, because we're so hierarchical that we actually wait for Vasiliki and Kelly. We expect them to take control all the time. And actually, what would be much more powerful is if we felt we could jump in and make those observations. So although it felt a bit disastrous in the moment, you know, it's that uncomfortable feeling, is it didn't feel slick, it didn't feel smooth, but actually, as you all know, with adversity comes learning. And later, when I've caught up with them, they said that it was the most painful session and the most powerful session in terms of the change that then occurred as a result of it. So that was very interesting. How am I doing for time? Am I running on a bit too much? I am a bit. I'm going to speed up a bit. So as a result of the purpose session going a bit awry, they then decided what they would really like to do is they would like to go away and work out what their objectives and KPIs on their own and come back and talk a combination and have a session which was a combination of their agreed objectives and KPIs coupled with talking about how they work together. So that's why this is a mixture of the green box and the turquoise box, because it was a mixture of the what and the how. And that's the final session that they wanted to run. By this time, and each time we were still involving 2 participants, 2 volunteers. And by this time, it was lovely to watch that when Michelle and I put together an outline structure for the session, they almost changed it completely, and we went with it. And you know, they were becoming much more self-sufficient, which was wonderful to watch, actually. So this was the so what session. These are the KPIs they came up with. I mean, being very pedantic about it, you know, I could definitely take issue with some of these KPIs. However, they own them. Some of them are whats, some of them are hows, and some of them are whys. They owned them. They weren't interested in the Simon Sinek why. This is what they wanted to get on with. They understood it. So Michelle and I were very happy to cede the floor for them to work out. And then what we did is we talked, and what we did is said, okay, now you've got your KPIs. How are you going to do them in a way that's different from before we got together? And they worked out, they came up with some agreements as to what they would do. And what they said is what they'd like to do is to have a review session where they pulled it all together, which formed our learning review session. And the learning review session, our focus was, and you know, again, we checked in with them. Are you happy with this? They were very happy with the process we were running through. Actually, we designed this one essentially, and they just give us the nod. That's absolutely fine. That's going to go fine. There's nothing going on in the wider context that would mean that this would be derailed in any way. I mean, the only thing that did happen was the HR director and the executive director asked to join in. I said, I don't think it's my call. I think you need to ask the team. So they asked the team leader, and the team leader said yes. And I'm not sure it was a brilliant idea to have them at that point. I think I would have preferred that they'd done their team review, because I was worried about it just changing the dynamic, having the HR director in the room and having their boss in the room. But in actual fact, I think they were so beginning to be quite functional as a team, actually, that they kind of ignored them to a large extent. I think I would brief the team. I think I would brief the executive board member and the HR director more clearly next time, because, yeah, there's a lot of chat going on, and which kind of got on my nerves actually more than anyone else's, I think. But anyway, we asked them, what have you learned about yourself in terms of your contribution to the team? We asked them, what did you think the team has learned to do differently as a result of this process? And we got them to do a team action plan where they talked about the team. That's interesting. Although they're working on individual stuff, we got them to come up with a team action plan where they talk about what the team will have achieved in a week's time, a month's time, and a year's time. And I actually thought you might like to see the actual facilitating guidelines that we used for this. We did it in a what you'd call a gallery, you know, when you go around the room, and we took them round. Each session was a picture. So, and we got them to close their eyes, remember the session. We gave them some prompts. Do you remember that was the day we did this? Do you remember there were 2 people not in the room? We were all sitting in that room upstairs, and then we let them get back into it. And then we asked them we asked them, where were you sitting? Who was online? What was going on for you before the meeting? What did you notice in the session? What was the dynamic? And then we asked them to we drew out their observations, the actions and the learns from each of those. And we went round the gallery. And because we went round the gallery like that, it was quite excluding for the HR director and for the executive director. And unfortunately for us, the HR director was occasionally coming in and telling them what they should have done, which was completely contradictory to the whole concept, which was empowering them to run it. But she was, and which is why I say you need to be really careful when you let other stakeholders come in. You need to be really careful about briefing them about what their remit actually is. So that was the session plan. I'll let you just have a quick look at it. And obviously what this one is, I mean, I think you can see that these session plans, we do them in great detail, but they're really a series of coaching questions. And the reason for that is we have to go with the flow of what comes out, and in a way you have to kind of change as you go along. But by the time we got here, because we were working so closely with them, actually the design, we pretty much stuck to it. It was only a couple of the sessions where the design wasn't working, like the purpose session, that we had to flex in the moment. And that's where team coaching, the real skill is you have to have a structure and you have to be able to dance in the moment, which is, you know, that's it's challenging actually, but exciting actually, I would say exciting. So very quickly, I'll give you my insights. I'll let you read these. These are the insights that both Michelle and I had as coaches. And finally, Kavita suggested that I share with you 3 pieces of advice, and I've jotted them down. So my 3 pieces of advice are, if you're going to try this approach, practice with a client that you know well. Be very transparent when you're experimenting. My second piece of advice is work with a co-coach and work with someone who's got a different style to you. I think that really helped that Michelle and I were really quite different. And work very closely with the participants to co-create the sessions. It's not about you owning the design, actually working in tandem with them so that you're helping them. And because they're only about 90 minutes long, you know, it's quite feasible to do that because you can change it up more quickly. And then finally, you know, you've just got to try it out. I was learning on the GTCI, and one of the things about the Global Team Coaching Initiative, sorry, I can't remember the name, what the I stands for, Institute, thank you, Kavita. One of the things that I noticed about that is it's a global online learning, and you're doing team coaching. It's quite tough to learn actually theoretically and globally just online. And it all really came together so much more when I actually started doing it. The other thing that I also found, and I've had feedback from my own team, we have 90 coaches internationally, but we have 27 in the core team, and my executive team, I'm the chief executive, and there are 7 of us on the executive team. My own executive team have said that I facilitate the team meetings much, much more effectively as a result of doing the course. So I actually had double loop learning. I learned how to be a team coach for a client, but actually it really improved my leadership coaching as well, because I learned lots of little techniques. I'm prepared to do timeouts. I challenge when it's not going. I ask the quietest member much more often. I use the whiteboard so that it's, you know, more inclusive. So I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to seeing you all.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, fascinating. I must say. Thank you so much, Geraldine, for this fantastic learning experience. And with your permission, we will move to the next segment, that is question and answer. And I'm going to invite my co-host, Sagarika, to take that on. Yeah. While Sagarika puts all the questions together, I would request all of you who have joined this session today with us to switch on your camera for a quick picture, which will allow us to capture this beautiful moment for all of us. Can we do that quickly on the count of 1, 2, 3? I request all of you to put your camera on, and we're going to do a gallery view here. And Dave, with Dave's help, we're going to get some picture clicked here. Dave, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Tell us when to say cheese.
Say cheese.
Cheese. Lovely.
Super. Just one quick second. Say cheese.
Cheese.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Dave. And I'm going to invite Sagarika to help us with the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Geraldine, for such insightful sessions. And we have very interesting questions from our participants, and I'll take one by one in the order it came in. So one of the participants had asked Mahesh Deshmukh, how many sessions did you have and how long was each session? And what happened during the coaching session? Any outline or structure that will be useful?
Well, the number of sessions was, my little diagram showed we had 6 sessions. They ranged between 1 hour and 2 hours, 2.5 hours. One was 2.5 hours. Most of them were an hour or an hour and a half.
Any structure that, he's also asked about the structure, if you could talk about.
Well, the structure that we used was the 5 C's model, and then the what, the why, the how, and the who. That was the structure of the process that we followed.
Yeah, I'll move on to the second question that comes from Tushima, our ICF Mumbai chapter president. How did the team address the challenge of divergent stakeholder views and balance it, reconcile it, and why, what the team itself wanted?
How did they reconcile it? Well, technically what they did was they had another meeting at which we weren't present, where they agreed what their what was going to be based on the various stakeholders. I think what they essentially, and I would guess that they probably decided which stakeholders were more important, i.e. which of the board were more important, and they probably went with their objectives. That would what I would guess. Now, as I've said, I don't think that's necessarily the right thing to do, but it was definitely the thing that this team had as a default mechanism, which was the most important, most senior person, their voice counts most. And what we were working with was working with that culture, but challenging that culture at the same time, because we were helping them not to replicate that in their own team meeting. Does that answer the question, Sagarika?
Yes, it does. I'll move on to the third question. You had mentioned about the psychological safety when you started the session. There was a psychological safety initially, and then you learned through the feedback exercise that the psychological safety wasn't still enough. So how did you deal with this? The question comes from Sudha Krishna.
I think, I mean, it's a good observation. In the early stages, we felt they were very wary of saying anything negative, really. And then we did the emotional barometer to make the point. That was to try and get them into, it's okay not to feel good. So that helped in the second session because it was opening them up a bit. The session where the psychological safety, and then the next session when we did the how, where we did Myers-Briggs and we talked about giving feedback, we were surprised to recognize that they were only giving positive feedback to each other. So we were thinking, oh, crikey, the psychological safety isn't as great as we thought, because otherwise they would give punchier feedback than they did. And so when we did the purpose session, which was the next one, the fact that it went wrong, and then we had to time out, and then we had to explore what we're going to do, that's when the psychological safety, funnily enough, really soldered, because they realized they could own the process and they could take charge. And that from then we felt the psychological safety was much stronger. So interestingly, it wasn't something we consciously did, but it actually, what really powered the psychological safety was, I probably think, it probably helped that I was vulnerable enough to say, I don't understand what's going on here. This isn't working. I'm taking control and it isn't working. And I think for them to see someone that was, in their mind, someone that's quite authoritative, an authority figure, displaying that vulnerability really helped them actually to feel safer. And Michelle and I tried very hard at the beginning to be very transparent. Michelle talked about the fact she was absolutely determined. She was going to say, I've never done team coaching. I'm completely new to it. So she had really, and I was very transparent at the beginning about, we've never done this before. It's going to be an experiment. Some things could go very badly wrong. So we had modeled the vulnerability, but I think really seeing me trying to take control and then coming unstuck really helped them. And actually for the leader, for Vaz, to see that in action as well, I think was quite an eye-opener for her as well, to recognize she needs to say, I haven't a clue what's happening. What do you think? Yeah.
Very interesting, Geraldine, really, showing your vulnerability, and also the emotional barometer was really insightful.
It's a good tool. Yeah. Just normalize.
Yeah, I'm coming to the fourth question. Could you share the tips that will help on coach company boards into becoming more effective? Respectfully, changing a board member mindset can be quite challenging. So how would you what would you suggest? The question comes from CN Murthy.
I think I probably need a bit more understanding of what's behind the question. Maybe have the person.
Mr. CN Murthy, if you are there, if you could just come in and share what is your expectation from this question.
Thank you. I wasn't able to unmute myself a while ago. Now I could. You see, I was just talking about individuals who populate a company board.
Yeah.
Yes, very senior people with a lot of experience with themselves, very fixed mindsets, and they have their own ways of dealing with issues and matters. And one often finds that boards don't gel together, don't get aligned, focused. And it's a little difficult to work with members of a corporate board, particularly if it's a very large organization, as compared to working with leaders in teams at tier 2 or 3 or 4 levels. And that's what I was aiming at. So is there anything specific that you could talk about?
In terms of the seniority of the board, I actually think the human behaviours, it doesn't matter what level you're working at, because what you have is people with a growth mindset, you've got people with a fixed mindset, you've got people that do all the talking, you've got people that don't say anything. And so actually the similar things come up. And the big difference about team coaching is you don't take the person offline and work with them individually. What you do is you tackle it, you get the team to tackle it in the room. And this is why I think it's much quicker and more effective, because if, for example, someone was constantly being negative, then one of the things as a team coach is that, you know, your intervention would be, okay, I'm noticing, if I can just intervene here, what are you noticing about the dynamic in the room at the moment? And someone will eventually say, well, I feel that you're always being a bit negative about things, et cetera, and they will get a bit personal. And then you step back and let them have the discussion. So your role isn't to call them out. Your role is to call out the dynamic, but not the individual behaviors. And that's really different than I used to think team coaching was. I work with them all individually, and then I work with them together, and then I work with them all individually again. But in actual fact, this is quicker, and it makes the big benefit of this approach is it makes them responsible for the team dynamics and not some external person.
A quick follow-up question on this, Geraldine. When you're working with members of a corporate board, the number of sessions that you can have are often very, very limited. You don't have too many sessions with a corporate board.
Well, interestingly, because these sessions are like meetings, and also part of what we did is we observed 2 meetings just online. We just both Michelle and I observed 2 meetings and observed the team dynamics a bit, so we got used to it, and that was helpful for our input. And in actual fact, you know, having been on a board myself as a non-executive director, companies are investing in this stuff because they recognize that they're not as effective, and so they bring in facilitators to do this kind of work. And as long as it's not the old school 2.5 days, an away day, and overnight, actually this is a more effective way of getting boards to deal with how they work, because you say we can come in and do something as part of your board meeting. Most of the board meetings I went to were half days. As an hour, we're going to do something on this, and you join that team every month for each of the board meetings. So in a way, there's no excuse really not to deal with it, because you're making it lean and agile, just like the way they want to work.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I will not hog time anymore and allow others to come on.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, so the next question comes from Ravi Iyer. How did the team address the challenge of divergent stakeholder views and balance it, reconcile it, and what
I think
with
we've
what
had
they
that
did?
question, Sagorika. I think you've had that question.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm sorry. So sorry. Okay. Yeah. The last question. Could you share tips that will help on coach company boards into becoming more effective? That was also kind of addressed. Yeah.
I think there's this one question that was there, Sagarika, if I may just come in here, about the measure of success.
Yes.
I
Very
think
good
that's
question.
a great question. Can you take that up here? Srinivas Rao had.
Yeah, Srinivas Rao, correct.
A really good question, Kapita, and I haven't even touched on it. What we did was, I mean, I think it's not strong enough what we did. I went back in 3 months after we finished. I had lunch with the team leader and asked her, how's it going? The HR director, they put, and I guess this is a measure of success we hadn't anticipated, but in their annual, they're a PLC, and in the annual report, they wrote up a little case study about the team coaching initiative. So they obviously felt it had some impact. I'm a little bit cynical about annual reports because usually they want to show off that they're doing something innovative. And obviously this was very innovative in the space, but nonetheless, if it had been an out-and-out disaster, they wouldn't have. The other thing is they requested for another team to be coached in the same way. I haven't, I didn't take on the assignment because I was really wanting to just trial it. But a couple of my coaches, and they didn't manage to stick to the process that I used. And what they did was ended up doing just a big day facilitation. So, you know, mixed in terms of impact. The team leader, I feel, has much better relationship with the team. One of the team members resigned. And she was the team member that, do you remember I said there was one that wouldn't change the methodology? And there was a whole, it was very slow and painful, but you know, even though I suggested, well, why don't we try this? She wasn't having it. And in actual fact, she, as a member of the team, was very unhappy because she'd applied for the leader job and hadn't got it. And so we were dealing with some of those dynamics in the room, but I didn't want to clutter it too much with all the other things that were going on. But obviously you're dealing with that kind of stuff as well as you're going through. And she left. But in actual fact, I think the process of Vaz getting to grips with running the team made her realize, actually, well, this isn't for me. I want to go and run the team somewhere else. So, and she left under good terms. So that was all we did. I actually ran a little Myers-Briggs for two of the team that couldn't manage to go. And I was asking them, two of the more junior pupils, I ran a little session giving them Myers-Briggs. And so I got lots of information from them. And I queried exactly what was changed. And what sounded was the big thing that changed was they both mentioned that the purpose session, which went awry, showed them all that they just weren't taking enough ownership. And now the meetings were much, much noisier, more people contributing. And that gave them their voice. And so that was good impact, I thought, evaluation.
Yeah. So fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. These were the questions. And thank you for answering so graciously, Geraldine.
Not at all.
Yeah. Kavita, over to you.
Yes, I'm going to request Dave to put the feedback poll. In fact, he did sometime back. Dave requesting you to do that again, so that we request everybody who's here online to respond to that. And we would like to know how you feel about this session and whether it was valuable for all of you. Can we quickly have the feedback poll?
I've done that, Kavita. I've done that, Kavita.
Okay, great. That's it. And I also saw that you have already posted the CCU claim form. So whoever have missed it, kindly check your chat window. You will find it out there. Now it's time for us to really wrap up the session. Like I said earlier, fantastic and fascinating to listen to this whole journey. And we have a lot of insights. And thank you so much for your generosity and for this really power-packed session today. And this is going to be a lot of value for all of us sitting here listening to you. And I was leaning in all the time because I didn't want to miss even a single word that you were saying here. So thank you so much, and please accept our sincere thanks.
It was a pleasure, Kavita.